Hi guys and welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. Today we are going to talk about Topping Centaurus. It's a topping DAC that uses Holo audio R2R DAC conversion circuitry. So in the heart of it, it's not a DAC chip, but it's a discrete R2R DAC converter made by Holo Audio, but the rest of the device around it, meaning power supply, digital filtering, output stage, is all done by Topping. It will be really interesting to compare Centaurus to Cyan 2 that, if I understand that correctly, has the exact same DA conversion circuitry as the Centaurus, and we will do that later. But for now I can tell you that Centaurus is more affordable at $999 US, and it's also much more feature-packed. So we are talking about, first of all, user-selectable inputs. So in the back we have plenty of digital inputs including USB, coaxial, optical, I2S, and AES, EBU, and you can select them at your own will, unlike Cyan 2. Analog outputs, normal things here, RCAs, which are not balanced, and then XLR outputs, which are balanced. And these analog outs can be either fixed in level or variable, so you can attenuate the volume. For that you can use front buttons or remote control that is also provided. And in the front you can see there's LCD display and some usual settings that we are used to from Topping. And one interesting thing is that you can use this DAC either in NOS, non-oversampling mode, or OS, oversampling mode. And when you enable oversampling, you can now choose, would you like it to be 2, 4, 8, or 16 times oversampled. And that does change the sonic qualities of a DAC. We'll talk about that too. So as you can see, we are talking about the same R2R discrete DA converter as in Holo Audio Cyan 2, but at a lower price and more features, much more feature packed. But let's find out how does it actually perform. I started listening Centaurus in its NOS mode. And what I noticed immediately is how rich the mid-range is sounding. And I'm especially talking about upper mid-range part, and that's that presence region. It's truly highly revealing, very open, very forward sounding. So all of those small details that are coming from either instruments or singers and their vocals, lip smacking, anything close to the microphone that is moving and making any rustle or crunchy or breathing noises, all of that is super clear, transparent, and very evident. And then we come to the fact that that upper mid-range, that presence region, is actually pushed a bit forward, and it's very open and prominent, which can be really pleasant in many cases, and it does make this DAC appear very, very revealing in the mid-range. And then moving to lower frequencies, we have a very decent bass line and mid-bass and lower mid-range, and there's nothing to complain there about really. Bassline is fast, it's precise, it reveals plenty of inner tone texture, so no bass instrument like double bass or big drums or anything like that. It never sounds just big and fatty in some sort of unresolving or gooey way. If you expect that from R2R DACs, this is not that kind of R2R, not by a long shot. If anything, we are talking about slightly leaner, faster, quicker on their feet notes when it comes to bassline, mid-bass, and even lower mid-range too. That lower frequency boldness and punch is just not something that this DAC emphasizes a lot. Now, if you enable oversampling, and that goes for 2 times, but it only slightly increases when you move to 4, 8, or 16 times, it suddenly feels like a highest frequency extension turned on a bit more. So instead of that upper mid-range being fully dominant, and offering that husky but almost matte kind of finish to tones, we immediately have that high frequency glossiness coming in, making tones more brilliant, more ringy in time. So, for example, glassy or metallic tones will sound more realistic when you engage oversampling mode. But in exchange, some things, especially if they're recorded that way, will also sound a bit edgier when it comes to those highs. So choosing between these two, OS or NOS, will come down to your personal preferences, system matching, and also your listening room. Just for example, if you have a room with a lot of concrete walls and glass surfaces that are not covered or treated in any way, you have a lot of these high frequency reflections, and there is a chance that you will prefer NOS mode. And it's more rolled off, laid back, matte approach, more mid-rangey approach. But if you have heavily carpeted room with heavy drapes and lots of heavy furniture, that kind of room sucks high frequency quite a bit, and it can make the sound coming from your hi-fi setup appear quite dry. And that dryness or matte kind of sounding tones come from the lack of those highest frequencies that give that ringiness and that metallic or glassy zing to tones. So if you do like that in a room with heavy carpets, drapes, lots of furniture, you will probably prefer oversampling mode. Oh yeah, one more thing, sound staging is actually very decent. It's reasonably wide, the pinpointing and layering is really good, precision is top-notch, width is really good, depth not so much really. The thing is, when you engage oversampling mode, with those highest frequencies being slightly more prominent, there is a sensation of bigger, wider soundstage with just more of that aura of air around instruments, and the soundstage does feel wider. And I have to say here that I did prefer using oversampling on Centaurus, but try it for yourself, see how that works in your room, in your system. Don't just copy-paste some YouTube hobo that is talking about this DAC. But I don't want to spend too much of your time talking about the sound in isolation. I'm going to do what I expect most of you will be curious about very much, is how it compares in real life to Holo Audio's Cyan 2. And even though Cyan 2 is a pricier DAC, it's actually less rich when it comes to features and functionality, because it doesn't have a remote, doesn't have a display. Even these several digital inputs that you can see out the back, you cannot select them manually. There is like automatic recognition of which input is active that doesn't work well. If you watched that review, you probably already know about my frustration with that decision. So it's a very bare bones R2R experience that is also only NOS, non-oversampling DAC. There is no option here to choose oversampling. But it is bigger, chunkier, weightier, feels a bit more solid. And this weight and size are spent on using bigger linear power supply with a bigger transformer inside. Output stage is also different, signal processing is different, so it's a different device altogether. But when they're compared head-to-head sonically, I have to say that Cyan 2 does sound a bit just bolder and juicier in lower frequencies. And because of that, tones have more chestiness, more body. And upper frequencies, upper mid-range, for example, is also extremely rich and open and offers plenty of fine texture and harmonic richness with Cyan 2, the same way it does with Centaurus, if not even more with Cyan 2. But it's also presented in a softer, more natural way, and less edgy than Centaurus. And because of that lower frequency boldness and fullness that I just mentioned, when you listen to a recording, especially acoustic recording or live recording that has plenty of space and good sound staging, inside of that sound stage, tones and vocals and instruments will appear a bit more three-dimensional in space, slightly more rounded and palpable, like they have physically more depth compared to a slightly flatter sounding Centaurus. And when it comes to highest frequencies, Cyan 2 as a NOS DAC also has slightly rolled off highs, so it's a more mid-range centric sounding device. If you engage oversampling on Centaurus, it will sound better extended in those highest frequencies, and they will have more of a glossy-like appearance. Unfortunately, you cannot do that for Cyan 2, and you have to use some external upsampler before the DAC itself. So quick recap, Cyan 2 does sound slightly bolder and more three-dimensional in space, and it presents equal amount of fine detailing as Centaurus, if not even slightly harmonically richer in the upper mid-range, but at the same time with less nervousness, with just milder, more natural, completely stress-free kind of sound. And it really does remind me a lot on having one good DAC that is powered by external power supply. And then when you listen to it with that small wall wart switching power supply that came supplied in the box, you hear it's a good, highly detailed, highly resolving sound that doesn't really lack anything. But once you really upgrade to a very good external linear power supply, you notice that the sound feels juicier and more fuller bodied, but at the same time calmer with edges and transients, and sound stage and that sensation of three-dimensionality and tone palpability increases. It really does feel like that with Centaurus and Cyan 2. But don't get me wrong, please. Even though on sonics alone I do prefer Cyan 2, Centaurus is more affordable and much more feature-packed and usable. So it still presents a very strong value. Now let's move to our next comparison, and that's with Topping's own D90 III Discrete that also comes at $9.99 US. I reviewed it recently, I really liked it, and this one is built around Topping's own 1-bit DAC DA converter. But aside from that different DA conversion, everything else is pretty comparable, starting from the exact same price that I've already mentioned, then extending to basically same feature set, same connectivity, and the only real usability difference that I can notice is they have different displays. Now, D90 III Discrete uses the same old monochromatic OLED that was used on previous D90s. It's very functional, it's readable, but adjusting things and moving through menus and settings is just not as slick and nice as on this newer UI on the higher resolution LCD screen on Centaurus. So very, very similar DACs, but let's talk about how they sound. Do they sound any different? When I compare them directly, I noticed that D90 III Discrete has fuller, juicier and punchier lower frequencies. So bassline is a bit fuller, mid-bass is a bit warmer. And they also punch a bit more. And because of that, tone palpability or chestiness of vocals, for example, is slightly more pronounced with D90 III Discrete. On the other hand, that upper mid-range that is very revealing and open on Centaurus is a bit more laid back with D90 III Discrete. And especially when you combine that slightly more laid back upper mid-range, that is presence region if you remember, with slightly fuller and juicier lower mid-range and mid-bass, you get the sensation that instruments and vocals are slightly further away from the microphone, and you do not get as much of these tiny, husky, rustly details, but instead tones do feel slightly further away from you and a touch more reverberant in space, like they're a bit pulled back inside of some virtual space. Now, which one of these is better and just more pleasant to listen to, it's very, very difficult to say. We don't even know really how close to the microphone was somebody when it was recorded and how that was mixed in the studio. So I cannot determine which one of these is closer to neutral. But the fact is that if you like something that sounds closer to the mic and closer to your ear, very intimate, like whispery kind of sounds, Centaurus will do that. D90 III Discrete is just a touch more laid back. Also, D90 III Discrete by default has great high frequency extension, the way that Centaurus gets only when you use oversampling. So D90 III Discrete is doing great out of the box with metallic tones, glassy tones, anything that needs to have that brilliance and that high frequency liquidity added to the tone. But yes, you can engage oversampling with Centaurus and match that part. What you cannot change is that slight tonal difference. That Centaurus is slightly more light-footed in the bass region, so tone bodiness, vocal chestiness is slightly decreased compared to D90 III Discrete, but presence region is pushed a bit more forward. With that, in some songs, a bit of nervousness, sibilance or edginess can creep in ever so slightly, which happens much less often with D90 III Discrete, that has kinda milder, mellower, simply more laid-back approach with those same upper mid-range frequencies. And once again, of course, I cannot tell you which one of these would sound better to you in your own setup and your own space. But for me, in my system and my room, I did slightly prefer D90 III Discrete, meaning that it is still my favorite DAC up to $1,000 US. And with that, I don't really think that you need any formal conclusion. We did the three-way comparison of Centaurus, D90 III Discrete, and Cyan 2. I would love to say that Centaurus is sonically everything that Cyan 2 is, just cheaper and with even greater feature set, but that's just not true. Wait a moment, I do have affiliate link for Centaurus. Forget what I've said previously. Centaurus is the greatest DAC alive. Just go down below my video, click on that link and purchase that bitch. Or D90 III Discrete, that one is great too. I actually slightly prefer it. You can even have two of them. Wouldn't that be great? Anyways, when I start talking like this, you know it's time to end the video. I hope you liked it. See you next time. Bye.